Yes.
We're about to be joined now by a very interesting character, and that is Gary Foley, one of the Aboriginal Australia's most ardent activists. He's now a teacher, advisor and part-time actor. So please welcome Gary Foley. Welcome, Gary. It's good to have you here.
Thanks, Bert.
And it's a very suitable day too, because there are a lot of people up there from Arnhem Land seeing television for the very first time.
Yeah.
Gary, I said that you're now a part-time actor and teacher, but you're still an activist. Explain to us exactly what is an activist.
I often wonder that myself. The media seems to often put that tag on me. I just consider myself as somebody who has been committed for a long period of time to trying to bring about positive change for Aboriginal Australia in the short term and Australian society as a whole in the long term. If that makes me an activist, then I'm an activist, I suppose.
Gary, a lot of Australians, and particularly white Australians who are well-meaning, they invariably bugger everything up. There are others who really care about the issues but don't know enough about them and don't know exactly what is required of them. What is the dream of someone like yourself?
Probably, hopefully, to tap that great reservoir of goodwill that exists out there in white Australia toward black Australia, the reservoir of goodwill that was indicated in the 1967 referendum, and trying to get those people to maintain that reservoir of goodwill and put pressure on the politicians to live up to the expectations of the Australian people after the 67 referendum.
Right. What do you believe those expectations are?
I think that the ordinary Australians then indicated that they wanted basic justice and equal rights for Aboriginal people. Since that time, we've translated that to mean economic independence for Aboriginal communities as being the way we achieve that. And that's what we want them to put pressure on the Australian government to do, to ensure that Aboriginal people achieve land rights. Land rights simply means economic independence and self-determination for Aboriginal Australians.
Who should choose that land?
Well, Aboriginal people themselves have made basic decisions about what land they are seeking in Australia today. Some groups, like many of the groups in Arnhem Land and in the north of Australia, have achieved that. In the south, there are a lot of misconceptions. For example, a lot of people seem to think still in the south that Aboriginal land rights is a threat to their personal private property. Mm-hmm. That's not the case. I want to dispel that misconception once and for all. Basically, the Aboriginal land being claimed in the south essentially involves former Aboriginal reserves, communities, where we can put together our act in terms of establishing our economic independence and thereby self-determination on land that a community lives on. Aboriginal land rights does not involve land for individual Aborigines, another misconception.
What about assimilation? Can that work?
I think that assimilation has clearly proven in the past that it doesn't work. The old assimilation policies are responsible for an enormous amount of suffering in the Aboriginal community. The example of this young guy in Florida at the moment on death row, the Aboriginal guy, he is a victim of the assimilation policies of the 50s, 60s.
Why doesn't it work though? The culture's too different?
Well, the concept of assimilation itself is, in my opinion, a fairly ethnocentric, shall we say, one, because it presupposes that one society is better than another, and the people in the society that is deemed lesser must change and become like the people in the majority or more powerful society. I think that what we need in Australia in the long term is a society where we can live with mutual economic independence and thereby mutual respect.
Want to ask something, John?
Yeah, Gary, what other countries have set up a situation where two cultures can coexist? Are there any role models? Well,
the People's Republic of China, when I was there in 1973, I saw something like 54 different cultures being able to coexist, being able to maintain their own cultural values, their own way of life without interference from another. I think there's been limited success in America and Canada and in certain parts of Scandinavia. There are examples throughout the world where it has been achieved, but I think that Australia has an even better opportunity to even lead the world in creating what some people might think is a bit of a utopian idea, but I believe that we can have parallel societies in the Australia of tomorrow without the need for interference or putting each other down or trying to...
Can you really see that working though?
You might call me an idealist, Bert, but yes, I can. I mean, I believe that Australia is different enough to many other parts of the world, although sometimes I wonder, with a lot of the American rubbish we see on television in Australia. I think that Australians and Australia should try and seek a different course to the rest of the world. We're a unique opportunity to show the world maybe a different way. And if we're going to build a more egalitarian, a more genuinely equal society in Australia, we're better to start as a foundation to build that than learning from the Aboriginal people.
Gary, you know as well as I do, one of the great problems with the Aboriginal situation in Australia is ignorance, certainly on the part of the new settler, the white man in Australia, the Anglo-Saxon. But what he says, whether he says it to your face or behind your back, he says that the Aboriginal or the Aborigine can't be trusted work-wise because he'll go walkabout at the drop of a sword. It says that the white man's grog knocks him around, he can't cope with it, and yet he wants to take it, and he just becomes basically a second-class citizen. And thirdly, that as a race, you're lazy. Now, I'm playing the devil's advocate here, but you know that that's said by just so many whites.
Well, racism is in itself born of fear and ignorance. And those sort of misconceptions you've just been exempling there are the classic misconceptions in Australia. I mean, there are numerous parts of Australia, for example in Arnhem Land, for example in Pitjantjatjara country in the northwest of South Australia, where Aboriginal people have refused to allow alcohol into their communities. It's very interesting because a lot of non-Aboriginal people still try and smuggle it in to make enormous profits. But basically all of those misconceptions stem from a misunderstanding about Aboriginal people. People think that Aboriginal people are simply white Australians with brown skins. It's important to understand that's not the case. Aboriginal people are different in here. We have a different set of values. Our whole society is almost diametrically the opposite of non-Aboriginal Australia. Starting right at the very beginning, the base unit of non-Aboriginal Australian society is the nuclear family. The base unit of Aboriginal society is the extended family. From that point on, it's almost near the twain shall meet. And that's why it's important that we need, as communities of people, to establish our own economic independence, to let us live in the way in which we want to. And then it removes the need for a lot of those problems that you're talking about and how they impact on our society, because your society is constantly trying to tell us to be like you, and we don't want to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But Gary, if I just take a minute, quite some years ago I did a movie featurette with the late Chips Rafferty, that great Australian actor. And up in Alice Springs, he was the absolute king up there, particularly with Aborigines. They loved Chips because he brought a lot of work to the centre and also to Aborigines. It was sponsored by a refrigeration company, Pope. And at the end of proceedings, one of the Aboriginal actors who'd worked on the featurette with us was given a Pope refrigerator to take back to his settlement. Now, a couple of points to be made there. Number one, how ridiculous, because they should have known that the settlement had no electricity. Secondly, when he got back there, he dismantled the refrigerator and he gave a piece of it to everyone who lived on that settlement. So the whites then thought, a couple of nights later in the pub, that just shows that they're stupid. A few of us didn't see it that way, because what we could learn from that was, OK, he was given a worthless gift, but he still shared it. And that's something which we don't do very easily. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, and that's it's those sort of qualities in Aboriginal people that I think that the rest of Australia can really learn from. Aboriginal society is such a compassionate and humanitarian society, and as I said, those are the sort of foundations I think we have an opportunity to build a new Australia on in the future. And the example you gave about the refrigerator, I mean, that's also duplicated in the examples of a lot of people criticise Aboriginal people when they build these new houses for them and they move all their relatives in, and the houses wreck because the house is too small. If people only thought, in the first instance, by building a house that's fit only for a non-Aboriginal nuclear family, and then moving an Aboriginal extended family into it, I mean, it's predictable what's going to happen. If the Aboriginal people had been asked in the first instance what type of housing would suit their needs and all the rest of it, then there would be no need for the sort of problem of that where a nuclear family house gets wrecked. I mean, a little bit of insight, a little bit of thought in advance can make a lot of difference in terms of doing things for and with Aboriginal people.
Gary, people in my age group and John's age group 10, 15 years ago would have laughed at the very thought of Aboriginals becoming militant and maybe Civil War stuff. But I mean, today, is that a possibility, a reality?
I'd like to think not, because in that sort of situation with violence breaking out, inevitably Aboriginal people are the ones who are going to be the losers. I think that it's a great testament to the basic humanity of Aboriginal people that in the last 20 years, despite all of the adversity we've been up against and the problems that have confronted us, we have not basically resorted to violence. In fact, I believe the Aboriginal people have been unbelievably smart in their ability to get their message across and communicate with and touch the hearts and minds of ordinary Australians in a way which is not violent. And so that we have achieved so much in the last 20 years. It's absolutely extraordinary. But we put ourselves on the national political agenda. It wasn't done by the politicians on our behalf. We forced Australia to sit up and take notice. And I believe, like I said, it's a great testament to our basic humanity that we never ever resorted to violence of the sort that was predicted 20 years ago.
Hypotheticals don't do very much usually, but do you wish that we hadn't come to Australia? There hadn't been a settlement?
Like I say, hypothetical is pretty hard.
It's too late for us to go home.
Ideally, yes. I mean, I suppose we would have preferred, or even if the initial contact would have been a bit more mutually respectful, so that our sovereignty wasn't imposed upon or taken away from us, or attempted to be taken away from us. I mean, if you guys hadn't come along, the French or the Spanish or some other even worse lot would have come along.
There you go. It's not all bad news. Gary Foley, ladies and gentlemen. And to our French and Spanish audience, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you here today. After this break, Peter Ford in Hollywood. Welcome back with us, Gary Foley and John Bertrand. And it's been very interesting and tremendous to speak to both of you. Do you do much television, Gary?
Not these days.
Yeah, back in the real activist days, you did a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Gary was just saying he took a lead in a role in the country practice to promote the concept of this whole thing.
Yeah, actually, I've got that clip here, and I chose not to go to it during the chat simply because I thought what you were saying was very interesting. But if we've still got it lined up, we might have a look. What was the reason again you took this role?
Basically, the audience of a country practice is so huge, and it's an audience that Aboriginal Australia, especially people like myself and the line we push, very rarely get an opportunity to reach. And I thought it was important to try and reach that audience and touch their hearts and minds, if you like, in a gentle sort of way. I think most of the audience of country practice who saw the stuff that I was in wouldn't have even realised, but they were being gently politically educated. And from the response that I've had since then, walk on the streets of Sydney or Melbourne or wherever, I really believe it worked. I've been really impressed by the response that I've got from people.
Let's have a look at this clip, please.
I think we're really starting to get something happening out here now, though. Alex, tell you about it?
A bit.
Yeah, it's a slow job, though. Still trying to convince Canberra that it's viable, valid, and it's working.
Been down to Canberra recently?
Get down as often as I can. It's the old squeaky wheel principle. But having Alex out here's really made a difference. Sometimes wonder what we'd do without her.
I don't suppose any one of us is truly indispensable.
Maybe not. Don't worry, Terence. Not far now.
It's a nice scene, that one. Good on you, Gary. I hope you'll come back on the show.
Yes, please, Bert.
And talk some more. We've got